Hi, welcome back to the Evolving from Religious Trauma course. My name is Laura Forehand. I'm here with Karl Forehand, and we are ready to dive into lesson one. It's going to be okay. So here we are out in the desert. That's what we call it when people start asking questions, challenging their long held beliefs, and evaluating the worldview they inherited. We call it the desert because that's what it feels like. It can be lonely and discouraging, reclaiming your autonomy, healing from past hurts, and permitting yourself to play the game you want to play the way you think you should.
Your experience may involve things like rediscovering your intuition, clarifying your purpose, healing from past trauma, examining your current beliefs, exploring other beliefs and worldviews, rediscovering your authentic self, and establishing new relationships with different power structures, advocating for the marginalized, and finding your agency.
We can't tell you exactly what to do. No super drug or magic prayer will make all your dreams come true. Anything worth doing takes determination, imagination, and persistence, otherwise known as work. Even though we can't give you a formula, we have been interviewing people since we got here and recording our thoughts about what we learned along the way. It's not a prescription for success. It is a transcript and description of our journey and the road before you. It is not a well worn path because every journey is different. It is, as I say, the road less traveled. We acknowledge and understand that you now have many feelings. Because of your inherited beliefs, you may be experiencing fear, anger, anxiety, sadness, or various combinations of feelings besides happiness, which religion prescribed. Your emotions are valid. Not only are they legitimate, but they are necessary, and they will help you get better and process your grief and pain that you only now realize you have. As you hear people's stories around the campfires of the desert, you will find language for your own journey, and eventually you will tell your own story. The one thing we hope you understand is it's okay.
You are now just reconvening with your emotions and your intuition. For me, that felt like a toddler learning to walk. Remember, you're just getting started and you will get better. You will find new friends and trusted guides when you need them, but you will also learn the beauty and perfectness of solitude. You will become comfortable with uncertainty, mystery, and nuance, and you'll be okay. Your journey will be yours, and you will play the game you want to play and find peace.
So let's start with the discussion. So, my first question for you, Karl, is why are the emotions that we have so important?
Yeah, I think the reason they're important is because we store trauma in our body. So we become more and more trauma informed. We kind of understand that connection that we have. Things that don't get resolved, right,
Mhm.
in our childhood, things where we weren't cared for or where we were treated badly that we couldn't resolve, we store that in our body. And because we store it in our body, it's connected with our emotions. So we get triggered by things, and then automatically that trauma is still trying to resolve itself. So unless we get in touch with how our body feels and our
Mhm.
emotions, then as they say, you have to feel it to heal it.
Mhm.
It's impossible to just ignore it and then it get better.
Mhm.
We need to be in touch with our emotions, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think for a long time, there was this internal message that I had that it wasn't okay to be angry or to cry. And
Hmm.
so even today, I'm getting close to 60 years old and I still struggle with crying and feel like I have to apologize for those emotions. I'm getting better with that because I am in therapy, and a lot of times I will discuss with my therapist how this particular situation, remembering it or whatever, made me cry. And whether I'm just crying in sadness or crying in anger. And she's always very validating about that. She says, good for you. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need to be in touch with those emotions because, like you said, if I'm not feeling it, then that means I'm stuffing it down. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to go back to that. Like, what are, like when we consider some of those emotions, like anger and, and anxiety, those negative, like society sees them as negative
Mm-hmm.
emotions. Like, are those okay as well?
Well, and I think sometimes people avoid deconstruction or healing
Mhm.
and those kind of things because um, they feel anxiety when they do,
Oh,
right?
yeah, for sure.
And that's normal. And that people that leave religion have a PTSD
Hmm. Hmm.
from religion that they carry over. So
Hmm.
it's normal to feel those emotions because you're trying to resolve some big questions
Hmm.
and you're trying to heal yourself deeply and once and for all, type of things. And those things are hard. There's literally no way to do it without feeling those
Hmm.
emotions
Hmm.
and the things that we avoid, like anxiousness, sadness,
Hmm.
right? Even anger, which probably has sadness underneath it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But all of those things can just, like you said before, just get stuffed back down
Hmm.
unless we face them and just be honest with myself. I don't want to be sad, but that's what I'm feeling.
Hmm.
And when I go back, when I think about that thing, then I feel it.
Hmm.
And unless I let that process work through, I can't ever heal.
Yeah. And I think that, like, when you hear the word anxious or anxiety, I mean, even though we've been out of organized religion for so long, you do think of those Bible verses that say, do not be anxious for anything.
Hmm.
And you think about, when you think about sadness, a lot of things that you think about are, well, I should have the joy of the Lord in my heart or
Right.
something like that. So a lot of that, even years after we've been out of organized religion, still creep up, because in organized religion, um, we were almost told that it's not okay to be anxious. That means you're not trusting in the Lord enough. Or if you're sad or angry and you don't have joy, then that's a huge problem.
Hmm.
So, I agree with you. I think those emotions, and I don't want to call them negative emotions, but in the church we consider them negative emotions. I think those have gotten a bad rap. I think they make up who we are. And I also think that if we don't deal with them, like you're talking about, then they come out sideways. So
Right.
the anger comes out as explosive.
Right. It
And the
hurts other
anxiety,
people.
yes. And the anxiety for me comes out in worst case scenario thinking. If I don't
Hmm.
hear from my children within 2 minutes, I've got them in a ditch somewhere.
Hmm.
It just it spills over into this, huge thing that it really isn't.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about solitude. So, can you
Okay.
talk a little bit about, like,
Sure.
what do you mean by solitude? Because, and let me preface this by saying that, coming out of organized religion, starting deconstruction, I felt very isolated and alone.
Hmm.
So when you say solitude, I get a little like, ugh, like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I like that. So when you're talking about solitude, what are you talking about?
I mean, I know you've heard people give this advice to people that are dating or in relationships and out of relationships, and they say something along the lines of, until you can be comfortable being alone, you
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be with somebody
Mm-hmm.
else. And we know that's complicated, and it's way more complicated than that when you're in relationships and so on. But I still think that's very important to understand what you just said, that we need to be comfortable being alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I was challenging that in my mind while I was still a pastor, and I could never find that solitude, being intentionally still. I remember in a membership class in a church, the pastor was trying to tell us about this part of the prayer liturgy or whatever that was silence. And he
Mm-hmm.
admitted, I can't even sit still for 1 or 2 minutes. But then we went to a quietness retreat
Mm-hmm.
where we had to have 5 sessions of 20-minute um, sitting in stillness, not
Mhm.
praying anything, not
Mhm.
saying anything, not doing anything, but just being
Yeah,
there and
right.
listening and so on. And I think that's such a critical part. I'm glad you pulled that out of the introduction. Um, but to just be able to be still and to not ask for
Mhm.
anything, not say anything, quiet those thoughts, and be non-judgmental about the
Mhm.
thoughts, like
Mhm.
like they teach in meditation and things like that. But just to be comfortable with that, to sit on the porch, look at the trees with no agenda,
Mhm.
with nothing to
Mhm.
do, nothing to say, just to be there.
Mhm.
I think it's such a critical role in our spirituality, not to mention our well-being.
Mm.
We got to be comfortable being alone.
Mhm. Yeah, really good points. I'm getting more and more comfortable with solitude. And I mean, I do things that I don't know that I necessarily like sit in solitude. I do that sometimes like on the front porch and things like you're saying. But even like getting up a lot earlier than I need to just to kind of have some quiet time to
Mhm.
myself, where I'm not really having to jump into the day so quickly. And I do the same thing like at my job. I get to my classroom, early, very early, and turn on some very calming music and just kind of center myself for the day, if you want to
Mhm.
think of it that way. So
Yeah,
I
centered or
think
grounded
yeah,
or whatever,
yeah,
however you want to say that.
yeah. I mean, there is some preparation going on as well. I don't like to fly by the seat of my pants when I'm teaching,
Mhm.
so there is some preparation, but when I do that, when I take that time to kind of center myself, I feel like the flow of the day goes so much better.
Mhm.
So, but I'm still learning how to do that stillness and quietness part of solitude.
Yeah. So you take the discussion questions from um, this course and you spend some time with them. That's one thing,
Mm-hmm.
but there is that intentional solitude. Some people used to call it centering prayer. It's intentional and it's deeper than that. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just you know doing a Bible study,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of quiet time. It's a little deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
That it's going to get back to your core, like you said, and
Mm-hmm.
just ground you, center you,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's very good.
And when you get to that point, then you can really evaluate some of the things we talked about in the introduction, like, what are your core beliefs? What do you truly believe about this? And maybe it's not just beliefs, maybe it's, really finding your true authentic self. What brings you joy? What brings you true joy? What makes you sad? What's your favorite food to eat? How do
Hmm.
you like to spend your time? I
Yeah,
feel like a lot of those things kind of got lost in the shuffle when we were
yeah.
inside of religion.
You'll see throughout this course, and if you read anything from us, that we can consistently reiterate presence and authenticity,
Mhm.
being where you are and being who you are. So let's move on to number one. Point number one: you are not alone. Feeling alone when you step outside of your established patterns is perfectly normal. Religions like Christianity design themselves to make you feel safe because they require you to think, act, and respond together as one. Churches calm our immediate anxiety, but often they don't help us answer life's more significant questions. There are thousands, if not millions, of us here in the desert. Our commonality is that we are all on a journey of discovery. We won't be chanting a creed or reciting the same prayer. Still, we will acknowledge and encourage each other to stay on the journey instead of establishing a venue and defending what we already know. When we are ready to share our personal narratives, we'll hear whispers of affirmation. It's not about reaching a consensus, but about the power of our stories to affirm our struggles.
You may have moved out of the group, but you are not alone. From this point forward, you will find what you need when you need it. Let me be the first to tell you, I know what that is like. I hear what you are saying. I felt that way too. I hear you, and you are not alone. You will soon realize that being part of the larger group brings temporary relief and bypasses our real issues. In the desert, you won't need multitudes of lemmings who speak, act, and believe the same. You will find a few authentic relationships that are perfect for you when you need them. I want to kind of go back to the beginning of what you said. So, how do churches calm our immediate anxiety?
Yeah, and so there's lots of ways they do that in a typical church in North America. That's a growth type church,
Mm-hmm.
not the one out in the country with 10 people going. But they're gonna first of all love bomb you in
Mm-hmm.
general, but that starts when you enter the front door.
Mm-hmm.
That someone shakes your hand, someone asks you your name, someone helps you get to where you're supposed to be going. The sanctuary is climate controlled.
Mm-hmm.
The music is intended to move you and make and stir your emotions. But then they tell you that we all pretty much think, believe, and act the same way. There's no surprises here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're all the same kind of Christians or the same kind of whatever, that come in, and that gives you some immediate relief
Mm-hmm.
from your anxiety, right?
Right.
Being in a new group's always challenging. If it's orchestrated well, then we can give the sense that everything's at peace here, everything's good, when maybe it isn't,
Mm-hmm.
But that's really not the point. It's an immediate kind of let me calm you down so that you can feel comfortable here,
Mm-hmm.
and that's good. Initially, I think we should all do that with each other. Someone
Mm-hmm.
comes to our house, we make them feel
Sure.
comfortable, but it's much better for us to be authentic and
Mm-hmm.
admit our mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So we mentioned that you're not alone,
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to get your take on, does it sometimes feel like we are? And immediately after leaving religion or challenging my beliefs, it does feel like we're
Mm-hmm.
alone, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've shared that in several podcasts and in our books, that it does feel very isolating and very lonely. And yeah, I don't like to sit with that feeling for very long. But I think even now it can still feel a little bit lonely. We do have, our online community, and we do have friends outside of doing this podcast or doing
Mm-hmm.
this lesson, um but there still is that, maybe stigma is not the right word, but that's the word I'm going to use. There still is a stigma, like I really can't talk to them about deep spiritual things,
Mm-hmm.
like, because we live in a small town, and so I'm just assuming that everybody is, of a particular religion or going to church on Sunday, when I, like, the logical part of my mind knows that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But so it still does feel a little bit lonely and isolating. Um, just being able to share kind of my questions, or my, the things that I may not totally buy into now that I once did when I was in organized religion.
Mm.
What about you?
Yeah, so I just think that it's um, a lot of it's perception, a lot of it, like you said, is what you're imagining in
Mm-hmm.
your head. Like if we're just sitting together
Mm-hmm.
and not doing anything, there's a perception of, well, that's a boring life. But in reality, if we can sit and be at peace and we've
Mm-hmm.
worked through our differences and everything's a lot purer now, then it takes a lot less to
Yeah.
satisfy that, and we don't have to be jazzed up by a worship band,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And it may be quieter, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not full
Mm-hmm.
and useful.
Yeah.
And friendships in the desert won't be perfect. Some
Mm-hmm.
of ours have lasted, some haven't. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems like they've always kind of been there
Yeah.
when we needed
Mm-hmm.
them, when we needed that friend or
Yeah.
whatever.
And sometimes that's hard. Although I think about, like, when we were inside of organized religion, we had friendships, right? We had relationships. As soon as we left organized religion, those relationships were almost immediately gone,
Gone. Yeah.
right? And so I guess I like to look at it as seasons now, right? So we had certain very strong friendships for a season, like you said, when we needed it, when we needed to be processing some things. We had people that would help us process that particular season of life. And it's not that we're not friends anymore, but I think we've come to the realization that we kind of all maybe move and flow in different directions. And that's okay. Like we can honor where we are, but we can also honor where they are. We may not totally agree. Maybe they're still have one foot in organized religion to an extent. But I do feel like even if we don't agree with that, we can respect that that's where they are in this season of life.
Yeah. So, like we talked about in the intro, getting used to solitude helps with that. But then the friendships we have, if we're healing, if we're doing the hard work, then those relationships will be better. And it doesn't take 100 of them, or a group thing to make you happy. You can be just as happy with one good friend or two good friends, or people that meet you in various situations in life.
Right.
And so, ridding ourselves of all that anxiety and that tension, that trauma, makes a lot of those things more pure, and we're able to ask for what we want and things like that. So let's move on to number 2.
Okay.
Number 2, the things they warned you about. If you're in the desert, you're probably unraveling the fear-based beliefs you were indoctrinated with. Most of the fear-based assumptions of organized religion, like eternal conscious torment or hell, were developed over time and scaled up to scare people into joining the movement. Jesus' reference was to Gehenna, which was a garbage dump that was continually burning. People like Dante probably influenced current views of hell more than anything else.
But our denomination warned us of other dangers if we stepped outside its groupthink. They told us of a slippery slope that we would slide down and spiritual forces that would attack, almost like a virus. After many years, we can only say it is not true. We also know of very few that return because of these things. We will have to face our personal darkness, but it's not like in the movies or the imaginative sermons. In many cases, our demons were created by high control families and religions. We will have to be with and make space for the wounded parts of us, but we don't need a sword or armor. It's not that kind of battle.
Yeah. So, Laura, did you slide down a slippery slope when we left? Did your life careen out of control? Was there, you were overcome by sin? You became a demon woman or whatever. Did anything happen like that after, we've been out multiple years, many years now. And so what did that happen?
In my honest opinion, I don't think I've slid down any type of slippery slope. In fact, I feel like I'm a more loving person, a more accepting person, a more inclusive person than I was inside of organized religion. Because in organized religion, it was dictated to me who I could approve of, who I could love, who was a sinner, who was not. And coming outside of organized religion, those goggles were taken off, slowly over time. Those goggles were taken off. And now I just see people who exude love. We've been to Pride. We've seen drag performances. We've met a drag queen on our podcast. And they just have the utmost good for this
Hmm.
world. And so there's a part of me that is saddened by the fact that I was so scared of people that were
Hmm.
different from me.
Hmm.
But that is something that I was taught. Now, if we want to talk about slippery slopes, I think that when I was inside of organized religion, I was sliding down apparently various slippery slopes. So
Hmm.
we've talked about this on our podcast, and I talked about it in our book, but one was a street dance that we went to
Hmm.
when at your first church. We were highly encouraged to go. And then when we did, and a slow song came on, and we were like, oh, we really like this song. Let's get out there
Hmm.
and have a slow dance together. Married, had 3 children by this time. You would think slow dancing, not that big of a deal.
Hmm.
But apparently it was. And so,
Yeah, that's.
we were basically, chastised for not for going, but for dancing.
Hmm.
And so, I guess I haven't really done a lot of dancing out in public since leaving organized religion. So I guess maybe inside organized religion, I was sliding down a slippery slope.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
almost like not that we're sliding down a slope, but stepping in something. Well, I didn't know that was a rule. I didn't know that was your made up rule that you
Mm-hmm.
had or your really
Mm-hmm.
narrow view of the
Mm-hmm.
scriptures.
Right.
And I did step in that, or I slipped on that, or I fell, but it doesn't feel that way outside of organized religion for me.
Yeah.
It feels more secure.
Mm-hmm.
There is less certainty,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because two things we can't understand totally is God and the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
We're guessing about all that.
Right.
And so all the nature of God and everything like that is a guess. So we have less certainty, but it's like exploring. And so um, I guess it can be dangerous to explore,
Right.
right? But I haven't got that,
Mm-hmm.
from all the things we've investigated
Mm-hmm.
since we've been outside of
Mm-hmm.
religion. Um, Not all of them we adopted or
Mm-hmm.
believed
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah,
used.
talk about some of those things. Like what have we investigated? I think
Yeah.
it's important for you to share that because I think you are super curious, which I love. Like, and so you like to investigate different things. So what are some of the things that you've investigated since organized religion
Yeah.
that
So
maybe you were once afraid
yeah,
of?
and so a lot of it's reading, a lot of it's going, watching videos and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I've learned more about Buddhism. I've
Mm-hmm.
learned a lot about yogis and their history and their what they believe, what
Mm-hmm.
they try to live by, and so on. We've done tarot cards. Um, we took a course on inner medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and learned about the four directions and all of
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
things. And they work with crystals some, and they talk about ayahuasca and some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't went that far with some of the things,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it's because we don't want to. We investigate, we find out more about it, and say, well, that might have some application to my life, might help.
Mm-hmm.
But there's none of it that I felt like we fell into.
Mm-hmm.
Since we read something about that, then demons kind of attacked me like a
Right.
flu or
Right.
something, and I didn't have my Jesus flu shot or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of narrative you make up for that, it's always kind of weak.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we have curiosity and we seek out truth. We in most things
Mm-hmm.
we learn something about, and we say, well, do you want to take course 2? Well, no, I don't think so. It's not my
Mm-hmm.
new religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I know more about that now, and I think that could help me in my life.
Mm-hmm. We're not opposed to it later on down the road if that's something that we,
Yeah, it's a
but
journey. It's a
yeah, it's a
trip.
journey. It's
Yeah.
not something we feel obligated to have to do. And I like that you mentioned, that just because we have investigated these things, it's not like we're walking around possessed now, or some sort of
Right.
demon
Something
is,
jumps on you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to number 3. Number 3, facing our fears and addressing trauma. As we continue on the journey to discovery, we discover many beautiful things that we never knew existed. Just as we crest the first vista and find new adventure, when we venture into the next valley of authenticity, we will discover things we previously did not understand.
A trauma-informed therapist can be helpful at this time. We also need people to make space for us and hear our stories. We have to be present with the parts of us that are wounded and are trying to heal. Our trauma is stored in our bodies, and it takes body awareness and time to help those parts of us reintegrate and move forward.
Later in the book, we get much more specific about this point. Most of these thoughts emerge from our previous book, Leaning Forward. Please don't ignore this necessary work. We have to feel it to heal it, and there are no shortcuts or magic solutions.
Okay, so let's start this discussion with what is trauma-informed?
So I think it might be encapsulated in what you read. So we only have to be present with the parts of us that are wounded and are trying to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in that is feeling it. And so I think a trauma-informed therapist is a therapist that not only gets you to revisit the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
but they know how that we must, be with that trauma and feel it
Mm-hmm.
to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's good and there's limits to therapy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Sometimes talk therapy can just lead us around in a circle. If we just
Mm-hmm.
keep revisiting the same trauma, number one, we'll keep being traumatized
Right.
by it. But what we've noticed in some of the things we'll talk about later on is that when we can feel it, we heal it. There's a shift
Mm-hmm.
that takes place,
Mm-hmm.
and we can actually move through it and
Mm-hmm.
move on to probably deeper healing
Mm-hmm.
and other issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think trauma-informed therapy can help you. Like you talk about that shift. And for me, the shift is so subtle,
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, it's been the ability to talk about things that I have stuffed down for so long, but not just talk about them, but actually rage about them and cry about them and things like that. And then I do notice especially one situation in particular that I was, that I talked to my therapist about, I am not having anxiety when I fall asleep anymore. And that was a shift that was so subtle, wow, I realized all of a sudden I am,
Mm-hmm.
able to fall asleep without having all these racing, anxious thoughts go through my head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about that in more detail later on. We're going to move on to number 4.
Number 4, don't start something new. Our previous denomination's battle cry and ongoing mantra was always to start something new. As churches crumbled and ministers escaped from ministry, they continually formed new churches and organizations that would hopefully solve the problem. Over time, we found that this was a very temporary solution. It never addressed the root causes of its dysfunction.
We see people making the same kind of mistakes in the desert. We made some of them too. Before I had a chance to heal or deeply examine myself, I began seeking out ways to form a group or find a church experience to help revitalize the old systems, especially when white males almost immediately form groups out here in the desert without healing or deeply examining themselves. Then they replicate their DNA from the previous life and cause some of the same problems as before. Before we start a new group and settle on new belief systems, we need to heal what was wounded and discover who we are. Then we'll know what we should do, or even if we need to do anything.
We can't afford to fall into the same trap as before. If we criticize our previous group and bypass all our feelings and woundedness, then we're just wasting time creating the same problems we escaped from.
Consider the fact that if you were in ministry before, there's a high chance that you're somewhat of a narcissist. You may not have intended to be that or even saw yourself as that, but you do have those tendencies. Consider that the worst thing for a narcissist to do is be on a stage. It only fosters bad decisions and it often harms the most vulnerable who listen to you.
Consider different opinions, like starting a podcast to listen to people's stories. Please encourage others, evaluate marginalized voices, or advocate for them. It might also be helpful to reject the possibility of making a living at this, because very few do, and the ones that do are pretty territorial. It's a journey of discovery, and you may need to find other ways to finance it and keep the lights on. If it helps you, then keep a blog or at least start a journal.
But don't sell your soul again to be popular. It's not what you or anyone else needs.
So let's start a discussion. I wanted to ask you a question.
Okay.
What do you see in former pastors out here in the desert?
Yeah, I see it in a lot of them. And almost immediately, I think they say, well, I'm deconstructing now. So I can't be in a church, right? I can't deconstruct in front of my congregation. So what I'm going to do is as quickly as I can, and this happened to me. We went to a bigger church for 2 years. And while I was there, I'm looking for how can I plug myself back in and, have a pastoral role and help fix the church, help fix the problem or whatever. So, but the problem was we didn't heal. And so before knowing it's not working. And other guys, I see the same thing, maybe a little bit later on, where they want to have a following online and want to essentially preach, have a little online church or a home church or whatever. And the problem is that not that those aren't good things and we can't find some good, and having people that follow us online and we can interact with them. The problem is they don't ever heal. Right. They don't stop and heal. And that was the problem in organized religion. Who can I tell? How do I get better? And I never had time to get better. So for 20 years, things just got worse. You don't want to replicate that in going through deconstruction or being out in the desert or however you want to describe that. I think pastors really need to understand that before you can help others, and it's what you've told other people, before you can help others, you have to get better.
Right.
And we've told parishioners that for years, but now we need to practice what we were preaching.
Right. Because there is a stigma that pastors are basically like just one like skinny rung below God, right? You have like a direct line to God. And so, yeah, who can you tell? Because you're supposed to be almost as perfect as God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do we get the goals wrong? You being a pastor's wife, former pastor's wife, and me being a former pastor, where do we get the goals wrong?
Well, I was thinking about this question, and to me, I feel like we are all like hardwired to be significant, right? We want what we do to make a difference, to be significant. I don't think any of us like go into a profession like I'm in teaching and just go, well, I'm just going to wing it today and hope for the best. We want to go in and we want to make a difference in the lives of children, or the lives, if we're a pastor, we want to go and make a difference in the lives of the people in our congregation, right? So I think we do start from a place that is meaningful. We don't want to be insignificant in this world. We want to have some significance. We want to leave the world better than we found it. But I do think that we have to be careful because it can easily derail, right? It can easily be where we want to, once again, be that center of attention. We want to be the one that has all the answers. And that's just not realistic.
I think for me, because I didn't become a pastor till I was about 30 or so. Then we were pastor and pastor's wife for 20 years. And now I find out through my deconstruction that some of what I was doing was harmful. It wasn't good and it wasn't the right thing. So for me, I felt a lot of guilt. I wanted to change the world, like you're saying, and that's always kind of a hidden focus. We want to do something to move the needle or change the world or help our neighbors or help our family. But then we also felt the guilt about that harm. And so we're trying to make up for it, kind of. And we're trying to make up for lost ground. And that's a lot of our dysfunction sometimes is, well, I'm 50 years old. I shouldn't be having these problems. So we ignore them. But I would just encourage people understand, like we mentioned in that point, that there's a little bit of narcissism in all pastor types and so on, and we need to address that.
Right.
It's very, very hard to cure, and if you have been deemed a narcissist, if you have narcissist personality disorder, you shouldn't be in a pulpit, and you really should understand that that's something you're going to deal with the rest of your life. So having a following, if that hurts other people, is not worth it. Anyway.
And asking yourself, are we just recreating something that we
just replicating our DNA, I think is how we said it in the chapter. You're just reproducing it again.
Got to take a hard look at that.
Yeah. Let's go on to number 5. Number 5, bypassing. Early on in my journey, I read 2 books by Robert Augustus Masters. One was Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark, and the other was Spiritual Bypassing. According to Masters, spiritual bypassing is the use of spiritual beliefs to avoid dealing with painful feelings, unresolved wounds, and developmental needs. It's so pervasive that it largely goes unnoticed. The idea was transformational for me. When I read the book, it opened my eyes to how I'd covered up my need for healing with platitudes, religious ceremonies, and the group thinking and creeds of my denomination. When I learned to stop bypassing my emotions and feelings, I found myself reading the second book and finding a way to heal my inner child and become whole. In Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark, Masters explains, our shadow is an internal storehouse for the parts of us that we've disowned or rejected or are otherwise keeping in the dark. When I read this book, I was in a hermitage in Kansas, having a dark night of the soul. The principles from this book, which I attempted to distill later in this manuscript, helped me emerge from the situation and better understand how I could heal myself by being with those wounded parts and acknowledging what I felt. As always, I suggest enlisting trauma-informed counselors and spiritual directors who understand trauma and who are trusted guides for us as we develop our intuition. But we also have to realize that the trauma is in our bodies, and by becoming body aware and paying attention, we can do some of the hard work ourselves. So what about you? How do you understand bypassing?
So for me, bypassing is when we use like spiritual language, flowery language to avoid doing the hard work. So, and what I've come to understand it to be is a conversation stopper. So in other words, if I'm expressing some anxiety that I'm having or a problem that I'm having, and someone says, well, just trust in God, or they recite a biblical quote to me, it's going to stop my conversation. How am I supposed to respond to that? Right? Trust God. Okay, well, then I'm automatically thinking, well, obviously, I'm not trusting God. And so I better just be quiet.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, to me, it's just a way of spiritualizing something because we're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We don't want to sit in someone else's uncomfortableness.
So I was going to ask what triggers spiritual bypassing. That's it, right?
Right.
That's what you just said.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that happen in life that are uncomfortable. One example I have is I remember when my younger sister had a miscarriage, and people just kept saying, well, at least you can get pregnant, or at least you have 3 kids, at least you have 3 healthy kids. Well, God just needed another angel. All those things are very bypassing, and they are so incredibly unhelpful and can be very damaging and hurtful to say to somebody that has gone, whether you have 7 kids, 1 kid, going through a miscarriage is a trauma to the body,
Mm-hmm.
and to your mental well-being. I don't, it doesn't matter. The number of children you have is irrelevant. But what I realized in that moment that I needed to do was just sit with her and sit with her, not only when she was crying, not only when she was talking, but when she was silent.
Mm-hmm.
There were times where she wasn't saying anything. And my presence, what was most important in that moment.
Yeah.
Nothing I could have said could have taken away her pain. And I think that's also what we're trying to do. I think in some situations, we really are trying to help take away someone's pain. But as you've said, and as we've said in this course, there are things you need to feel to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes going through some of these traumas in
Mm-hmm.
our everyday walk on this earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my question to you is, do you think we can personally bypass ourselves?
Ultimately, no, I don't.
No?
I don't
Okay.
think you can. I mean, you can for a time, but it's going to come back.
Right. Okay.
So, that will, stuffing things down is the same as spiritual bypass.
Right.
Well, it's all going to be better by and by. Well, God's going to take care of it. Well,
or I'm 50 years old. I should be over this by now.
I should be over this, and just if I'll just move on, it's going to be okay. It's going to get better by itself. It's just. We used to say in the South, faking yourself out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think we do throughout our Christian life and our regular lives. And it's triggered because we're uncomfortable. We don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't want to have difficult conversations. We don't want to just admit that I'm sad, which is perfectly appropriate for that situation and what I'm going through. And it's good for me to be sad. When I went through these focusing sessions dealing with my shadow, sometimes it was like weeping, and that's not normal for me. And so it scares you. You want to spiritualize it and give it to God or whatever. And then we don't ever get better. We don't heal. So bypassing is a big deal. It's amazing how many conversations. We've done over 300 conversations online in our podcast. And it's interesting how many times that subject comes up over and over and over again.
Right.
It's really important.
Yep.
So move on to number 6.
Number 6, is it worth it? We haven't interviewed everybody in the desert, but we have listened to over 300 stories on our podcast. We have many good friends here in the desert, and we've watched the successes and failures of former pastors and ministry workers since they started their deconstruction, which I would call an evolution. Some of them ducked back into a different form of organized religion. Some became atheists, and most embraced a non-religious spirituality. Although they all admit there was work involved, they unanimously confess it was worth it.
What they found wasn't always what they expected, because they usually awakened to the understanding that they didn't know what they didn't know. Intuition, scientific understanding, and enlightenment can evolve us to new levels. The only mistake one could make is to believe that they have found the solution and begin defending it to the masses, which stops their journey of discovery. This is what we call the endless loop of theology. You may notice that we use the phrase of God, which we started considering in our book, Leaning Forward. This is a summary of what we discussed there in more detail. I do not know if I can say that I'm a Christian anymore. I do not want to be an atheist, agnostic, or even a done or a none. None of the labels fit me anymore, and even the terms that I like, such as mystic or contemplative, connect to dogmatic realities in different religions. More than anything else, I like this fresh lens to examine the concept of myself as a unique being, questioning my idea of being of God. I am totally and completely uncertain where this discovery journey will take me. I do not have a point to prove or a dogma to confirm. I start with the phrase and examine what I discover as I journey forward. I invite you to join me as we journey and discover and question everything.
Because it is worth it.
Yeah.
So, our lesson 1 action steps.
Have you ever felt alone? It's normal to feel that way, but take a moment to imagine some way that you can connect with others on this journey. Consider the desert sanctuary as a starting place.
Number 2, what were some things religion warned you about? Take some time to consider the reality of challenging the status quo. You are likely to experience some PTSD. Be honest about this.
What things cause you to fear healing from trauma?
Have you been tempted to start something new? Why might this be unwise before healing?
Explain spiritual bypassing as best you can. What are some examples of your experience with bypassing?
Why will completing this part of your journey be worth it? Or what do you hope for in this part of your journey? We can't wait to see you in lesson 2.
As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.